I'm super excited to have Allison Wagenfeld with us today. So Allison is the CMO of Google Cloud, and prior to Google, Allison wore many hats. She was an operating partner in the venture world at Emergence Capital, and also co-founded Quicken Loans at Intuit, and also ran marketing at a venture-backed startup. I'm super excited for this conversation, as many B2B founders often ask me questions about Google. For example, how do we work with giants like Google? What are Google's key initiatives? How should we think about our own product initiatives to complement Google's? And what best practices can we learn from Google, especially through COVID? And if anybody has other questions for Allison, make sure that you type this into the chat and we'll try to address that towards the end of the session, so don't be shy. But Allison here is to answer some of these common asked questions, and I'm super excited to hear from her. Maybe to start, Allison, do you mind just walking us through your responsibilities as CMO and initially what attracted you to this role?
Great. Yeah, well, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here. I feel like hanging with B2B founders is in my core, having come to this role at Google from Emergence Capital, where we invested in the kinds of companies and the people that are here today. So when I start a little bit with like how I got to Google, and then I can go into the role that I play and what our team is responsible for.
Fantastic.
And also, as Joanne mentioned, I think we have plenty of time for the session. So if you have questions that you want me to pick up as we go or later on, happy to answer anything.
Yep,
so
just type in the chat in the bottom right for the audience.
Great. So in terms of my background, it's really quite varied of how I got here. It's probably one of the less linear career paths that you'll often see. And so started in investment banking, actually, interestingly, at Morgan Stanley for a couple of years in New York and Hong Kong, then went to business school. And while I was in business school, I made the transition to tech, spending a summer at Microsoft as a product manager. And then after graduating, going to Intuit. And I was always pretty entrepreneurial and had an opportunity in Intuit to write the original business plan for Quicken Loans, which was awesome. And so we started building that out, working really closely with the engineering teams and scaled that, ultimately bought a company and spun that all out. So Quicken Loans is obviously a huge company today. You have very little role in anything since the very early founding days, but it's fun to see how that's grown and expanded and been such an important part of at least the mortgage sector in the US. So from there, I went over to a venture-backed startup as the second employee and effectively a co-founder. So know what it's like to be two people in a room. Well, now it's probably two people on a screen and building out a company. Did that for a couple of years, sold it to a competitor, and then went over to run Harvard Business School's Research Center for a while, writing and teaching about entrepreneurship and marketing, thinking that I would do that for a couple of years, but that ended up being longer because it was super interesting. And over the time there, I started writing more and more and researching more and more about enterprise cloud companies. I did some early cases on Salesforce from the very early days, and then on AWS, and then other enterprise cloud companies, and got to know the partners at Emergence Capital through that. And ultimately ended up going over there as an operating partner, working with the portfolio companies on their go-to-market strategies, among other areas. And that's where I think I met Joanne originally, in that role. And then I thought I would actually stay in Emergence. I loved investing, loved the sector, but Google reached out kind of out of the blue because they were looking for someone who was familiar with the enterprise sector and also pretty entrepreneurial and also with a marketing background. And ended up talking with Diane Green at the time, who had come in off the board of Google to jumpstart what then became called the Google Cloud business. But when I started, it was just Google's enterprise businesses. And it came in there as the first head of marketing, and now I've been there for 4.5 years as effectively the CMO of Google Cloud. And so what Google Cloud encompasses is what most people know as Google Cloud Platform and all of the different areas that we can talk about, as well as what's now called Google Workspace, previously G Suite, and at one point even Google Apps for Work. And so responsible for marketing all of those different areas, and work closely with the product and eng teams, with the partner teams, of course, with our sales teams. And so the brand, creative, all of the different aspects that you would imagine as part of marketing. So it's been quite the journey over the last several years as we really expanded on every single dimension. I think Google Cloud has become an increasingly large, important part of Google overall.
Can you double click?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you double click on how the strategy initiatives have changed from when you joined 4 years ago? And we can talk about some of the things you guys are working on today, but maybe just a little bit of history there.
Yeah, so I feel like when I joined, I often said it was the world's biggest startup, and it truly felt that way, where we had tremendous products, and we always have at Google, but they were not really set up for the types of customers that were increasingly using them. So we had some really large customers like Snap or Spotify, digital native companies as we call them, who are using Google Cloud platform. And then we had so many different startups. But what's really happened over the course of the last 4 years is building out the entire business to be able to serve companies and customers of all sizes. So everything from some of the biggest enterprise companies in the world and being part of their core digital transformation companies like Sabre, who, as you can imagine, have a lot of complexities, particularly this year, and opportunities, to working with really fast growing startups and ensuring that we have the products and the technology and the go-to-market and the customer engineering and the accessibility to help all of these companies be successful and becoming much more outward facing. I would say at the beginning, the business, a lot of the original technology was actually built for Google and then commercialized. And now it's really shifted. We're starting with customer needs, customer success, customer empathy. I'm sure all things that all the founders here are thinking about. And that was frankly a bit of a journey for the Google Cloud business, because historically Google had not been really kind of focused in that same B2B tech way. Of course, ads business is B2B in many ways, but it was a very different, creating mission critical technology for customers.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Let's fast forward to today. I mean, 2020 has been a very strange year for many of us. First, could you talk about some of Google Cloud's main initiatives? And the audience has asked about a few specific ones, like purpose-built AI solutions, as well as the future of the edge. But just maybe give us a overview of what are the 3 or 4 key initiatives for your team.
Yeah. So I'll speak predominantly about Google Cloud overall. Also happy, obviously I run marketing, so happy to go into any of the marketing elements of it, but I'm gonna guess that most of the questions are broader than that. So Google Cloud, and I'll focus Google Cloud Platform and Workspace. So focus in a number of areas, certainly on infrastructure, but one of the main elements that we've been focusing on is enabling companies to operate really effectively in a multi-cloud setting. So we introduced a product, and really kind of set of products around Anthos about 1.5 years ago now. And that allows companies to essentially have a central plane of which they can manage multiple cloud providers and have a common set of security protocols and a way of operating their cloud. So that's been a really major area of investment for us. And just Google's always had a really approach to openness and everything around open. And that really has come through in a lot of our cloud technology. And Anthos is built on that same mindset in terms of allowing customers to choose the different cloud providers that they want to, but enabling that to be successful. So that's been an area of focus. Data and analytics has always been a real strength of ours. People who use Google Cloud are probably familiar with BigQuery, which is really truly a leading data and analytics. We bought Looker as well. So looking at those collectively has been important to us and increasingly important, and really helping our customers go from the proverbial data to insights. But people talk about that all the time, but that's really what motivates us, is how do we help people really understand their data better and really kind of be that data cloud in many ways. And that really goes off of Google's core strengths all the way back from the mission of the company, is helping people use data better. So that's another key area. Collaboration and focusing is what we call kind of the collaboration cloud. That's where the growth of Workspace has really been about, in integrating all of the different aspects of collaboration and productivity together and making that work much better for our customers. And then, of course, security and AI, and those have both been areas for us. Start with security. That's been a major initiative. We bought a company called Chronicle last year. We've always been investing in security. Those together have been really important. And as we work really with companies of all sizes, the offerings we have there have been particularly important. And then let me go into AI a little bit more, because our AI strategy has grown tremendously from originally, even a couple of years ago, was much more about providing AI tools And now it's much more of an industry vertical approach where we still provide the tools and we have different ways that people can access them and build their own models from those. But we also have in each of the key industries that we focus on a set of like retail, different forms of AI specifically for that segment, or in healthcare or in financial services. And that is increasingly, like even in our marketing team, we think holistically about AI and industry solutions in many ways together. And we see that that's really an area of focus and a real area of strength for us, is taking the customer insights with the really strong AI technology that we have at Google.
Are there aspects of AI, whether it's the types of businesses that you focus on or certain verticals that you don't think Google will touch?
You know, at this point, because we have both the set of tools and practice and techniques, so those are available for everyone. Another company that we bought, Kaggle, it does a really great job of giving people access, and originally they know it as kind of the competition company, but increasingly has really built a community for AI specialists and analysts. And so that's enabling everyone to really understand all of the different tools that we offer. And then continuing, I'd say, the 6 or so really primary industry verticals, we will keep building solutions on those. But of course, we're not going to be able to touch every single industry subsector is how we look at it.
Sure.
And so there's so many opportunities for startups to add more, or for startups to use some of our core technology and then build on top of that.
Are there 1 or 2 initiatives that are less discussed or talked about that you think the audience should be aware of or will be interested in? We hear a lot about Google initiatives through the press and through your 9-week event, but are there other aspects that are maybe less known?
You know, I think there's been quite a bit where we've been focusing on our AI solutions. I think some of the newer AI solutions that I'm excited about are, for example, document AI, because there's a lot of different ways that we can use different types of imaging and then allow companies to build entire businesses out of those. We see a lot of that happening right now in the financial services sector. We see that happening with our lending doc AI area. So it's been great to see how companies have taken the foundation and built entire companies on those. And so I think that that's certainly a really ripe and fertile area for startups.
Got it. Awesome. Maybe let's look forward a little bit to 2021. COVID has accelerated many organizations, have changed priorities for product initiatives. Tell us a bit about how Google has dealt with COVID and how that has impacted 2021 strategy.
Yeah, so COVID, like for everybody, has been complicated on so many fronts. It's for our customers, we have really been shifting to trying to address the customers at the different stages that they're at. For some companies, like in the retail sector, having to shift to omni-channel so quickly and being able to go do everything online, like we support companies like Lowe's and Home Depot with their e-commerce strategies, and those have just exploded. And nothing makes us happier when we heard the CEO of Lowe's on CNBC saying we couldn't have done this without Google Cloud and that kind of enabling. So for certain sectors, that's been really how do we enable innovation and scale during COVID? In others, it's really been about helping customers with cost savings of that they are in a really difficult place. And how do they get out of long-term data center contracts, and how can we help with that? Or how do we help them look at all of their costs, or their cloud costs or non-cloud costs, on-premise costs, and help them look at different sets of programs where they could really change the foundation of their cost structure. So
go ahead.
But the way we phrased it is from a marketer standpoint is, at the foundation, we're helping customers solve their biggest problems. And what those really have fallen into this year are around solving for innovation, which is how can we use COVID as an opportunity to innovate more, and then solving for efficiency, and how can we use this as a chance to really reduce our cost structure and become more efficient and change what we do. Some companies are focused in both areas, but there are some companies that are really squarely in one or the other. And we've reframed a little bit about how we approach the market. And when we work with our sales, it's much less around selling, and it's much more around serving our customers with where they're at. And that whole sales and marketing approach has been an important shift from Not that we're ever like kind of hardcore sellers. That's really never been Google's approach,
Right.
but really a service mindset.
Yeah, I think on that note, you guys have built very deep relationships with partners, with other businesses. At the same time, you have a pretty formidable competitor with AWS, who's also very aggressive in kind of tapping to this ecosystem. Can you talk a little more about how Google works with its partners, and how should we think about, or how should startups think about the choice between the different platforms?
Yeah, so Google has always been really open in its approach and very much sees the ecosystem as a way of helping enable and participate in the ecosystem, as opposed to being competitive with its partners and the ecosystem. And so that's from where we announced, I think it was a year and a half ago, where we talked about partnering with a lot of the open source companies, MongoDB or Confluent or companies like that. And how do we create a market space or marketplace through Google Cloud where partners and companies can help sell? How do we support that? How do, in some cases doing co-marketing? We believe that we're in such early stages of cloud technology, and that it will continue to shift so much that at this point and going forward, it makes much more sense to try to be good partners and help each other. There's so much more development to be done, so many customers that we would do better going to those companies together. And that's definitely the mindset. I have all of the executives as a partnership mindset.
Yeah, makes sense. It's an interesting challenge for the marketing department as well in thinking through this. Actually, one question that the audience has is, how has running marketing been for you, and what are some of the challenges you face, especially in this environment?
So running marketing is complicated on a lot of fronts this year. Some is, adjusting everything from what our team is focusing on to how we're spending money to we were just launching a big campaign at the beginning of this year using, airport advertising for the first time and outdoor, and then that didn't make sense, so that we had to pull some of that back. And then looking at digital elements, running our Google Cloud Next conference. I'm sure you all are familiar with the various B2B conferences. Obviously AWS just had theirs, but we've had our Google Cloud Next conference has been really important. Marketing has really been at the heart of that. And we were planning that for April. And of course, in late February, we're like, not sure how this is going to work. And then in early March, we first said, okay, we'll pivot to digital and do it but we'll do it in the same dates. And then things around here were so complicated at that time frame that we pivoted the entire conference to a 9-week series that we ran through the summer. And that in many ways was fantastic because each topic essentially had its own week and its own opportunity. And we reached hundreds of thousands of people. But in terms of burning out a team, of running a conference, like, what it's like, you're running this for 2 days of running conferences over the course of those of you who've done any kind of digital events for 9 weeks. So it's been this fine line of continuing to invest, and we're truly a global team. So we think really holistically about North America and EMEA, Europe, Asia, and Latin America, Japan. And so thinking globally and not trying to burn out the whole team as we kept kind of shifting and changing and reimagining and reinventing what we were trying to do and how do we go to market. It's been an interesting challenge and opportunity. The team's done phenomenally well, but we're also checking in with people personally. And, I think this has also been an interesting year, and I'm happy to dig into this if people are interested, about you're just kind of being more human. You're kind of showing up in people's rooms and bedrooms and living rooms and kitchens and all of these different places and getting to know people very differently as a kind of a backdrop, a team, and while we're kind of still trying to have these really big, ambitious goals about what we're trying to do to build a business and serve our customers.
For sure. Many of our companies have, daily or every other day, the Zoom check-ins, and, people play games with each other, and we just need to figure out other ways to bond in this more two-dimensional world. Going back to marketing for a second, and you mentioned running a 9-week digital conference. What were the results of that in comparison to the physical conferences, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so we measured it on a number of different dimensions. We measured, there was a bunch of news that we had to land and we wanted to communicate. So we measured in terms of, did we get those news out, the pull through of the messages, the different kind of publications where it came up in share of voice and social and other areas. So it was kind of a messaging set of metrics, which actually was really effective, and partially because I think summer was different this year. We ran this through these summer months, which normally you wouldn't choose to do events during summer, but I think because people couldn't really travel summer, it was a different type of year. So I think we kind of had space because there wasn't a lot going on at the same time. And we also had some interesting news to share. Then we also had kind of a demand gen type of set of goals of how many new customers can we bring in? How do we introduce those new customers to our sales and to our partners teams? And so I had a number of different dimensions on that, which we were pleased about. And then there's a very long tail of follow-up, as you can imagine. So we had objectives there. We had different opportunities of how do we engage with our current customers? How do we use this as an opportunity to give customer advocates, our customers that want to tell their stories, a platform to do that? I'm sure for many of the founders here is that, you have these early excited customers and you want to give them a platform and a place to tell their stories. And so being able, at first, we had to go through this like, well, what's the virtual stage that we're giving to customers and how do we engage that way? But we're really pleased with the amount of customer stories that came through this that then could get reused to share with other customers.
Got it. Makes sense. How about just a couple other topics under marketing? How about hiring and onboarding? This has been a challenge for pretty much everybody in different ways. How have you guys managed that?
So that's also been complicated as for everybody. So I hired 3 new senior leaders onto the team this year, none of whom had met each other or met anyone on their teams. One started, I think, in May, June, and July, right around that time frame. So that part was kind of interesting. We tried to spend a lot of time as a leadership team getting to know each other again in these virtual settings and mixing it up through more fun things and others. And then giving the teams opportunities to meet their direct reports in each other. But of course, as new leaders come on, sometimes reorganize teams. So those elements have been, there's no like secret solution. I'm curious if anybody has any, by all means, throw it into the chat or share. I think it's, again, just making the space to be human and engage and can't be all business all the time, and as much kind of shared objectives. Google uses OKRs as a way of sharing objectives and key results and trying to ground on those so that there's, so it's not kind of vague about what everybody's working on. And as new leaders come in, adding as much clarity as possible about what roles are important and how they get to know people.
Makes sense. There was a question from the audience around open source as a marketing strategy. Do you mind just touching upon that real quick?
Sure. I mean, so open source has always been really core for Google. Everything, Kubernetes, open source, TensorFlow, these elements really at the foundation of Google's culture and philosophy. And so within Google Cloud Marketing, embracing open source providers and partners has also been key as well. And so that, I think that you'll kind of find that forever. I think that's a real strength of ours. I think that's an area of differentiation relative to AWS and relative to Azure for that matter. And that is, we actually, like the extent that you can find in our blogs, we've actually written quite a bit about why we think that way and why that's really a foundational value of Google.
Makes a lot of sense. Another question, I just want to make sure we address these. Someone asked about the future of Firebase products from your perspective. Any thoughts on initiatives this year and next year as you guys think about roadmap there?
So I'm probably not the best person to answer the details on the roadmap. I can say that it comes up and it's important and it's an area of focus, but I'm probably not the best person to address the specifics there. Sorry about that, whoever asked that.
No worries. Awesome. Let's talk about the higher level initiatives around Google Cloud. Kind of when you think about your key KPIs, your OKRs, not just for just 2021, but for the next 4 or 5 years. Could you describe what would make your job very successful?
So I look at a couple different categories. From a mission standpoint, I look at a Google Cloud and then talk about cloud marketing because I think it's, I can talk even more detail on that. Kind of from a Google Cloud standpoint, So our mission is to accelerate every organization's ability to digitally transform and reimagine their business through data-powered innovation. So that's how we think about it. And talking specifically data-powered innovation, so data is really at the core and how we think about Google and how we want to help customers with all their data. Around transformation, that may be less true for a new startup that isn't kind of needing to transform, but certainly with some of the biggest companies that have been around forever, that is really where they're looking to us. And reimagining the business is really at the core of that innovation element of Google. So it's in that kind of core foundation. And then we look at it again through workspace of reimagining how people work. And that we see as, we look out several years of being that partner that can really be for companies. What does the office look like? What does collaboration look like? What does productivity mean? So that's a core part of it. And then also reimagining kind of, again, as we're talking about kind of the data and innovation elements of it, and not feeling so restricted to a single cloud, but really being able to use the best of all of the different clouds. And certainly for us in areas around what I was talking about before about Anthos and infrastructure and AI and our analytics, of really being able to bring that to life for all of our customers. And then certainly the kind of industry specific solutions are at the core element of that. And I would say there's 6 industries that have really stood out for us. Again, is healthcare, retail, financial services, media and entertainment, manufacturing, and public sector. In fact, we're just running a public sector summit right now, and we think there's tremendous opportunity in public sector for innovation and opportunity for those of you that are focused in that area. So that's about the broader kind of from a business strategy standpoint. We also have a number of OKRs and focus areas about being the best place to work. And for me personally, and for the business, about what does it mean to create the area with thinking around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and thinking holistically about that. And even within cloud, we've been, and specifically in cloud marketing, thinking about that from the form of representation, who's on our teams, representative leadership accountability, and inclusiveness in the marketing and what we bring to market. So there's a number of different OKRs that are important to us that are beyond the kind of core business elements.
Can you share some of the OKRs around diversity and inclusion for your group?
Yeah, so we've kind of looked at it in 3 broad categories. It's around leadership, accountability, and there's a number of, in terms of the key results, things around, we have some really great training, one that's called Digital Human, which is helping people understand how they relate to others as human beings and understanding everything that goes with that, around being able to have candid conversations. You may be familiar with radical candor, but talking about we have some special trainings around that, and ensuring that all of our managers and all of our leaders have been trained also around precise language. That's been a real opportunity for us to really understand the kind of what different words mean and how people use them, and sometimes just having everybody be more thoughtful from that standpoint. Then it's also around the kind of ensuring that our teams, the underrepresented groups, that we're building the kind of representation on our teams from a hiring and also from an inclusion standpoint in terms of being part of decision-making and different forms of teams. And then also inclusivity in the work and marketing. What do we bring to market? And ensuring that it not only does it represent diverse and underrepresented groups across different ways, but it doesn't do that in a stereotypical manner. Mm-hmm. So we've been looking at it, taking it to the next level about how does that show up.
Some really interesting lessons for startups as they build their initial teams. Maybe going back to that world, since most of our audience is building early stage companies, and you were in the venture world in your prior life on the board of several startups. Any advice for B2B founders in terms of working with Google, thinking about competing with Google, worrying about competing with Google, and just broadly from your experience?
So my advice would start with worrying about product market fit and serving customers, and not worrying about Google and not worrying about other large customers, because the experience that I've had, and I'm sure many of you see that, and I'm board members, is that starting companies and being able to solve challenges that are not solved yet, and being able to do it in a way that is scalable and that you can continue to grow and, the proverbial product market fit, but it's so true, and focus there. And when that happens, good things will happen. I mean, if you were Snowflake, for example, if you said, oh my God, we shouldn't go into data analytics, Google's mission is around data and analytics. You would never want a company like that to they're like, we can do it differently. We can do it better. And there's absolutely space. Obviously, Snowflake is incredibly successful. So much respect for that company. And Google also has tremendous opportunities and growth and everything around data analytics. And so I would say, don't be so focused on what the big companies are doing, and just start with solving customer needs and doing it better.
That's great. Well, look, thank you so much, Allison, for spending the time. This was super helpful, and I'm sure folks may have more questions and may reach out to you directly. But really appreciate you sharing your insights and also giving us a glimpse of what you and Google have been up to.
Yeah, happy. Thank you for having me here. If I didn't hit any of your questions, or if they were areas that I didn't have the detailed answers, feel free to DM me somehow through Twitter, LinkedIn, or wherever, or find my email, and I'm happy to follow up and put you in touch with the right people at Google. The startup community and ecosystem is incredibly important to us. That is a major area of focus and investment, is ensuring that startups are successful using Google Cloud Platform, startups successful using Google Workspace. And so want to make sure that everyone gets, we have free trials and credits in all of those areas, and definitely help companies scale, and want to make sure that we are doing that with all of you. So thanks for your partnership.
The free credits are amazing. I would encourage everybody to explore those if you haven't yet. Thank you, Allison, once again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye.